Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Coming Out Stories from India series. Coming out, what is it? So, coming out is a term used primarily in the LGBT community when a queer person shares about their sexual orientation, usually with friends and family. Nicola and I decided to launch these coming out stories from India to ensure we all work together in changing the narrative. The last few years, since my own journey of coming out, I've been looking for role models, stories that can help me in my own journey. There is hardly anything, and if at all, not in depth enough. But what was common to most is that stories are very challenging. However, we also discovered that not all stories are that of pain, suffering, and trauma either. This is when the coming out stories from India took shape to bring to our audience real people with their real stories, however, keeping in mind the complexities of India. Hopefully, these coming out stories can help pave the way for those who are in any phase of their coming out journey. I'm Raga Olga D'silva, or Totally Out Now, as you know me. Now, our guest today. Our guest today is one package of flamboyance, a fashion diva, an author of two books, and we'll talk more about his books as well. A trailblazer, as I see him, in the LGBTQ space. I mean, there's so much more to this man, and I'm personally a huge fan, and I keep sharing this with him. So let me welcome Parmesh Shahani.
Hi,
See,
Raga.
see, I
I'm
told you.
happy to see you.
So happy to see you, and I love that we are sharing very funky frames.
I
And
know. Hi, Nicola, in the back, wherever you are.
so good. So Parmesh, thank you first of all for agreeing to be part of this series. We've had some very interesting conversations with very interesting people, and I'm expecting this to be even more interesting.
I'm
But
so happy. I
so
remember I remember the first time Namita messaged and said, "You must meet my friend Raga." And I've just been so inspired by you both, actually, and seeing you over the course of the past few years in so many cities in India. Now, of course, Zoom, barabar Zoom, but I love how you've shared your story of love and resilience, and fabulosity with the world. So I'm just very, very inspired, and it's my honor to be on this show.
thank you, Parmesh. I really wish that our paths had crossed much earlier. I think my journey would have had a very different direction. But thank you, really, and we'll talk more about that as well. So, Parmesh, my first question is: did you really have to come out?
Well, it should have been obvious. um, uh, I think for all of us, and this is probably a recurring theme in your show as well, right? I mean, coming out is something that we in a sense do all the time, because you come out in different ways to different people in different contexts. Straight people come out as well all the time. They don't portray it as coming out as straight all the time, but they're sharing aspects of their, say, straightness, with each other and with us queer people all the time as well. So in my case, my journey, I've always been very comfortable with my sexuality. And I don't know from where this comfort came, but it was always there. In the seventh standard, I had my first crush. Through my seventh, eighth, and ninth, and a little bit of 10th grade, I had, I suppose now in reflection, it was a relationship or a boyfriend, and he had qualms in the 10th grade because people saw us together holding hands, and he freaked. And I mean, those days, right? We're talking about, I'm born in 1976. So this is late 80s, early 90s. So people didn't use the word gay and all. People are like, are you guys homos? And that's the term that people used at that time. And, he recoiled. And until then, we actually had and we thought, it was very organic. Our friendship, our affection, our intimacy was very, very organic. And there was, but I think hearing that term to frame something that to us was so beautiful and pure kind of made him recoil. It made me say, oh, wow, there's a word for us. Because, homo was just a word, right? I mean, I didn't take it in any context. And of course, so I think people go through various, I mean, some people uh, take time to accept who they are. Some, in my case, I, you know, always knew that I was attracted to and, would want to be in loving relationships with other men. So for me, it was a question of articulation. And I think that articulation of saying, yes, I am gay, or yes, this is who I am. I think it takes that process of articulation takes longer in the queer community simply because we have to combat so much of hetero. The world is not created as a safe space for us to articulate our, desires. So that process took time over. It took me years of confidence. I must say, it took many other people helpfully nudging the way. So one incident when I was young and working in a magazine, I think, because I've always been flamboyant, I was always the one in school wearing neon green Madonna shorts with pink laces. I don't know if you remember the 80s or 90s, neon was such a big thing. So I was always flamboyant. I was always very expressive. I was always very sensitive. Now, I know enough straight people who are all of this as well. Um, but at least in my case, I've always been myself. So I guess there were people in my friends and there were people in my support group who, uh, were waiting for me to actually articulate this. And, I think it, even while working, I was working while in college, and my bosses would drop helpful hints like, you can tell us anything you want to. I was like, I don't want to tell you anything. Or, I was a young reporter, and one of my bosses then, Amrita Shah, it was at Elle magazine, said, I think you should do a story on the emerging gay scene in Bombay. And and it was very clear that they were like, go out there, find the community, say it. So it took me time to say it over the years. So in multiple contexts. Yeah, yeah.
So did you grow up in Bombay? Are we
I,
talking about Bombay?
so I grew up between Bombay and different parts of the Middle East because my parents were in Oman and Bahrain at different times. So I grew up in Bombay, and then at age 7, I mean, in a very simple middle class family in a one room home. Um, and we are talking about the 80s, which is pre-liberalization. So in an India in which uh, scarcity and self-flagellation and non-consumption were all virtues. In an India in which one went to the neighbor's house to watch TV, and even families that wanted to or could buy TVs would say, "But why would we buy it when there's a neighbor in whose house we can go watch it?" In an India in which thumbs up was a luxury and things like that. And then suddenly I grew up, and my dad got a job working in a supermarket in Oman, and after a year or so he could bring his family, and so suddenly from this, Oman and Bahrain and all were not like, uh, the fantasy always was, the West, either through the books you read or through the movies you see. But they were great middle grounds in which you could, like, have Tobler or Kit Kat or, see TV or, like, when it comes and not wait for it to, for international news to come, whatever. So I grew up at this cusp of pre-liberalization post India. So an India in which consumption started uh, in a big way, at least for like English-speaking middle-class people like us, but also in which information started coming out in a lot more ways post 1991. So I grew up in the 80s, I suppose, but post 90s was great because I spent the early 90s when I was in college, and that was that first boom of global news coming in, or international music coming in, or shows like Donahue and Oprah, which would occasionally have queer people, or The Bold and the Beautiful, which might be heterosexual, but wow, they were kissing, or things like that, or Baywatch, or things like that, right? So I grew up in that at that moment. I think pretty much around the time that you were growing up, uh, but I think maybe in different contexts. So yeah.
But so you think those crushes that you had, you're talking
Yeah.
about boy crushes, were they in India? because that was only until you were in the seventh standard, right? Or you're 7 years old, you said. But were they in Oman and Bahrain, which is completely different?
Which is very different. Which is very different. I think your crushes, your attractions are, you can't. They're not geographically bound. But I think how you choose to express them and how you choose to articulate them is very much a function of, where you are located. If you are located in certain spaces, so obviously in the Middle East, I could have them, or even in India for a large part of my life while growing up. They were secret crushes. I mean, because after what happened, I mean, in the school incident was after being very close and having a friend and having what now in retrospect seems like a relationship in school, him recoiling in the 10th standard and saying, I don't like this term, I don't want to be this word, and had did have an effect on me. And while I was like, I like this term, I'm okay with this, etc., but the fact that he was so uncomfortable with what society would say kind of made me also very circumspect at that time, and said maybe this is something I need to be more careful about. And so I wouldn't say went into the, I mean, I had never come out, but I kind of decided to be more circumspect about who I would tell this to and, when. Whereas I think between 7th and 10th standard, if anyone had asked, I would have said it very, very happily. Yes, I like boys. Isn't that good? And I like him. But I think,
Interesting.
yeah. Yeah.
Interesting, because the word homosexual, right? It was so. I mean, I remember, I
Yeah.
remember having friends, male friends who were. I come from advertising. I spent a lot of
Yeah.
years in advertising, talking about the early 90s, and
Yeah.
we had, art directors and creative writers who always were paired, and some
Yeah.
of them were gay, and they would be called homosexuals, and I know that they would take offense to that word. Not that
Yeah.
they stopped living their lives, but homosexual word, the term was so derogatory at that time.
Or
It was,
like, you homo. I mean, it's very different from saying I'm homosexual to someone saying you're a homo in that way.
yeah, yeah, it
Um,
carried a lot of negative
Now I
connotation.
say it. I say, "Kar se kaho, main homo hu." I'm homo because you claim it, you own it. But it's difficult to do when you're young. It's difficult to do when you don't have a support system. So
Exactly. So
yeah,
exactly. So that's what I want to actually unpeel, Parmesh, because you come across as somebody who's so confident. Who, I mean, I feel that you've always been confident, but I just want to understand was
yeah.
because you said after when somebody called you homo and you lost a relationship basically based on that, it pained you, right? And you went away for a while, suspecting, you said. But let me ask you, what about your parents? What about your family environment? Did they just accept you, or what were the conversations around this?
Not while growing up. The conversations began later when I chose to make them. I mean, growing up, I suppose I was. I mean, as I said earlier, I was very flamboyant. I was what in at that time would be called sissy, sissy-ish. Um, um, so I guess my parents should have, I mean, I guess they knew they didn't want to talk about it, and so on. Never underestimate the capacity of Indian parents to not see what is right in front of their eyes, uh, uh, or to imagine that what they're saying is something else. I mean, I think Indian parents are masters at that. So, what I'm grateful for though is that unlike other parents who, I think, given how many stories we've heard of parents actively ruining their children's lives, I'm grateful that mine ignored and didn't speak about it. But I mean, in an ideal world, would I have loved had they, had we had conversations, would it have been, I would have loved if it was normal in a house for them to say, look, you can tell us anything, it's fine, we love you, we love, whoever you choose to see, and of course. But given the horror stories one has heard, I'm glad they didn't take me for conversion therapy and electrocute the hell out of me. I'm
Gosh.
glad they didn't kill me. I'm glad that they didn't forcibly marry me off to a girl. I'm glad that they didn't shame me for my whole life, and give me scars that are very, very difficult to heal from. So in retrospect, it was fine. Like, on balance, I think as far as Indian parents go, I mean, I'd give them like a between 5 to 10 out of 10.
Oh, this
uh,
is This is so true. I mean, we know of a lot of families that put their children through exactly what you said: shame. They make it about themselves. They say that they're cursed. Conversion therapy, religious, treatments, and medical shock treatments.
Mine
It's,
just pretended not to see the fabulous femme sissy boy in front of them, and
but
that's
who
fine.
who was buying you those fabulous clothes? I want to know.
So that's my thing. My parents, and I mean, it's interesting. I mean, but what's also interesting is I remember very clearly, right? So of course, in this, they followed, like, my mom has always been very much more on my side, and my dad has been very much more typical in that gendered kind of way. But I remember when I was, I think when I was 6 or 7, I was 7 years old, and we just moved to Oman, and I had friends in the building who were boys as well as girls, and of course, I'd grown up in a very simple, until then, I never had things. So all these girls had, had toys, and I had zero toys. So I really insisted at that time that I said, I want a toy. And they were like, fine. So I was like, I'd like a Barbie doll. And that was very, because, these girls had Barbie dolls. And I was like, and of course, we went to the shop. My dad was like, don't you want a He-Man? Don't you want a whatever? And I was like, no, I really want a Barbie doll. And so they had this altercation at that time, and my dad was like, I don't want my son to have a Barbie doll and things like that. My mom was like, no, he wants it. And so then my dad is like, okay, at least buy a Ken as well. And that was
So
kind of interesting.
interesting.
And of course, we went home, and then I took the dolls, and then, of course, with all the girls we were playing, and of course, when kids play with Barbie dolls, we take all their clothes off and things like that. And Barbie and Ken looked exactly the same. So we would do
But
whatever.
this is interesting, right, Parmesh? This starts at home, right? So the stereotyping,
Yeah,
boys must have these toys, and and girls should have this toy, and there is so many barriers within our own families, right?
yeah.
Growing
I mean,
up, do you
I'm
think that
grateful
is?
that they actually bought it, right? I mean, they didn't deny it, which
Yeah.
is why I said I'm grateful. I mean, on balance, I think they've been better. But yeah, you're right.
But your extended family, that's your family, that's your immediate family. What about your extended family? Because you said you are a Sindhi. Now, Sindhis, as far as I know, can be very conservative, right? And
I don't know.
opinionated.
Well, opinionated for sure. Conservative, I'm not. I think no. As far as like community goes, I think Sindhis are like fine. I mean, there are conservative Sindhis. There are. I think with Sindhis, as long as you, I disappointed Sindhi families in so many other ways, right? I mean, if you choose a career in the humanities, for example, I think it's more disappointing than being gay, because Sindhis don't understand that you don't want to do business and not make money. Why
Yeah.
do you want to study all this for? I mean, so I think with Sindhis, a different set of values. I think money tops everything else, and uh, it's more pragmatic that way. I wish other mercantile communities were like this, like Gujus or Marwaris or whatever. Make it much easier. Mom, dad, I'm queer. That's fine. That's fine. Just make sure you're
Make
rich.
money.
Just
Make
make
sure
money.
you're rich. You're
Yeah,
rich and clear.
yeah. So but anyway, so I didn't have any issue. I mean, it wasn't also. It's not stuff that one shared with extended family and all in any case. So yeah, and now they're fine. I mean, now they're when they see stuff in the news or then the book comes out, they have a WhatsApp group in which they celebrate my success.
But see, you grew up at a time when, like, the word gay, for example, it didn't exist. We didn't have any of those communities that we have now, right? So
Yeah.
how did you? I'm just trying to understand, how did you accept yourself that you like boys when your social network didn't have any information? So
So
that's
books,
something that.
so books were my life. Books were my solace. Books were my escape. Books enabled me to and this is one of the mantras with which I've lived and curated and written over the past decade for sure. Other worlds are possible. And that's what, the penultimate chapter of Queeristan is titled. In fact, the book was titled Other Worlds Are Possible. And until my publisher and me said, Queeristan sounds more hashtagable. So there, yeah. Yeah, can you imagine writing Other Worlds Are Possible? It'll be like too big and it's a
This is
mouthful.
perfect. Got
But
it.
but so and books made me realize that there are other there are other alternative imaginations out there, people out there, ways of being out there. So whether it's reading Oscar Wilde, or whether it's having the frisson of discovering Man and Feroz in A Suitable Boy, and like just racing through that novel, enjoying like the complete normalcy with which Vikram Seth addresses that relationship, and plays it out against this incredible backdrop. I mean, whether it's, I mean, of course, Wilde, um, Baldwin, everyone. There are so many authors that you discover, but at least for me, it's been very much through through books, that I've been able to imagine, and and lose myself in, and imagine other possibilities. So one was really books. One was books, which is why I've been so delighted that my two books are part of now a canon of queer Indian writing. Once again, while growing up, most of the books were of Western books, not even Asian, right? You imagined, I mean, even the children's books that one read, or, the Hardy Boys books that one read, or in which, you just wanted to sleep with one of them while growing, while reading them, right?
Nancy
Um,
Drew for us.
but Nancy Drew, correct. I mean, Nancy Drew is 100% lesbian. Come on. Um, so, uh, but I mean, to have these in an Indian context has been so exciting the past, in the past 2 decades or so, because we didn't have those growing up. We had to like imagine these, we had to read these books, and we had to like put ourselves in their places, and, Indianize them for us. So for me, it was books. For me, it was discovering newspaper articles of people like Ashok Rao Kavi, Kori Walia, Riyad Wadia, Sylvie. I mean, so many of the earlier icons, who came out, and who came out publicly in media. Every time you would read something about it, right? Whether it's, or if it's Freddie Mercury, or if it's Elton John, or if it's, right. I mean, through the 80s and 90s, it was also strange because, right, you're in, at least in my case, I'm articulating my own sense of identity against the backdrop of more and more people coming out, against the backdrop of a global AIDS pandemic. And so many stories that you hear of queer people, or gay men in particular, were so and so died, and did you know that he had AIDS? So, right, that's also the world in which you are framing your identity, and that's the world in which your identity is being framed for you by the context. So,
Exactly.
uh,
And at that time, I think parents reacted
yep,
also because of this, the whole AIDS pandemic that we're talking about at that time. I mean, look at the 80s, 90s was very difficult times, right?
yeah,
But when did you come back to India, and was the scene out there, and were you able to meet other men as well, apart from Ashok Rao Kavi and stuff who are iconic, of course?
yeah. So with me, it was very much. I mean, uh, I think the internet was incredible, because the internet came to India in 1997. And immediately after that, one had access to either social websites, communities were formed, uh, magazine like communities like Tricon, etc., from San Francisco developed online presences and became diasporic groups. So the advent of the internet gave me a lot of confidence to actually go out and connect with others. Also finding mentors. So Riyad Wadia, who is who was India and continues to remain one of India's finest queer filmmakers, who unfortunately passed away in the early 2000s, was uh, one of the most important mentors in my life. And he was my professor. I was studying media at Xavier's at that time. He just walked into the class with his, shiny sunglasses on his head, showed us Bombay, which had all of us students with literally our mouths were open throughout the 11 minutes of the film, because we'd never seen anything like it. And he was like, "This is the future of Indian filmmaking." So seeing someone like that, I befriended him. I made him my mentor. So, having the presence of someone like Riyadh, who actually then took me out and showed me the scene. He was like, this is Apollo Bandar. These are the walls in which we cruise. This is
Fun.
voodoo. It's a bar. Here's where people hang out and there are parties. And here is this. So Riyadh kind of served as my, I was this fresh-faced, young-eyed, um, you know, newbie on the scene, and he pretty clearly figured that maybe dancing and partying and this kind of life wasn't my scene as much. So Riyadh then foisted me onto his brother, who incidentally also happened to be gay, who's another mentor of mine called Roy. And Roy had a partner then, and they've been living together now for so many years. And so Roy's world was very much, come home, cook together, do some gardening, see TV together. And Riyadh is like, Riyadh told me, he's like, I think you're more a Roy kind of person, because when Roy goes to bed, we all go out and party. So you be friends with Roy. But that was interesting because in one family, at such a young age, I got to understand there's multiple ways of being gay. Being gay doesn't mean only one thing, right? I mean, I can party, I can cruise, but I can also be domestic. I can meet a bunch of wonderful people, but I can also think that maybe I want to be with one person and have that commitment. So early on, so my coming out in a sense was a kind of blossoming and a kind of
Yeah.
articulation of my own identity to myself, but also this realization with friends, with the community, with the internet, with you know, uh, spaces like gay.com communities, and
Yeah.
with places like Humsafar as physical spaces in Bombay, where I began to then have the confidence of going and seeing a very different kind of queer scene, which was not only English speaking, in which mujras were as much fun as dance parties, in which Bollywood was the norm, and I kind of identify so much more with that. That's when the journey really began of exploring oneself and also of, say, my city.
We know your Hema Malini story. We'll get to that as well. But I was in advertising, like I said, right? In the early 90s, I still remember that there was a clique. So gay
Yeah,
men all hung out together, and a certain kind of gay men, right? From Sobo, for instance.
yeah,
Others were not invited in. And in my own agency, I was at Ambience Advertising. And
yeah,
in my own agency, I knew at least of three such men from three different, I'm going to use the word classes.
yeah,
One from from South Bombay, one from Bandra, and one from, I think, Central Bombay.
yeah,
And they never hung out together. Even when we went out to official parties and out of station, they
yeah,
were they avoided each other. It's like, oh, you're not my type. So
yeah.
did you find that happening as well in the scene in Mumbai? And where did you fit in?
Um, I, I mean, unfortunately, I grew up in Sobo, and so I guess people always thought of me as a Sobo queen or something, which I've rectified over the past 10 years by trying to not move out of Vikhroli as much as I can. So now I'm the diva of Vikhroli, but I've never fitted in, but I've always flitted in and out of multiple scenes because for me that's more interesting. I've always looked at my own sexuality and my own journey as well as that of the community through an anthropological lens, which is why Gay Bombay, the first book, came out of this impetus to look at the context that led to the emergence of a particular online offline community in Mumbai. And to answer your question, I think this kind of stratification has only increased over the years. In fact, it has increased what used to be on maybe class and language lines has stratified further so much more. Whether you look, if you want to look at caste, whether you want to look at religion, whether you want to look at, you know, uh, trans inclusive or transphobic cliques, whether you want to look at, uh, you know, bi inclusive or biphobic or LBT inclusive. And you see this play out in so many ways. We've seen it play out in so many ways over so many years. Each year around Pride, there is some, issue or controversy or the other in which the fissures in our community, come are laid bare. So, over the years, this is only increased. And I find it personally, I mean, and the same actually exists online. So I have a friend, one of India's most incredible scholars called Professor Dhiren Borissa from Delhi, and Dhiren's work is on how technological tools like Grinder, which are meant to be utopian in the sense of they're supposed to like do away with barriers, actually land up enforcing casteist barriers because of the language, because of the kind of pictures that they uh, advantage. And so you go online imagining that you will escape the realities of our world, but you land up in spaces that only reinforce these. And the reason I find it particularly tragic is that in my own life, I've experienced the power that comes with love when it transcends. I mean, queer love is transcendental. Queer love can succeed beyond caste, religion, or class. I mean, that's the magic of queerness. So queerness can actually be, we can be the answer for straight society to look towards and emulate. So it's tragic to me when when we don't recognize the liberatory power of queerness.
So well
So
said, Parmesh. So well said. This whole stratification and the whole division that we seem to have created within our own communities, right?
yeah,
I'm new to the scene. I mean, I'd say that I've been out only a year and a half since my book came out, Untold Lies. Until then, I have journeyed in and out, depending upon how the society has treated me or my family has treated me, and I find it quite tragic is the word when I see so many subdivisions within the community. It just totally creates confusion in my mind, and
yeah.
I think to myself, if it creates so much chaos and confusion in my own mind. I'm new to the scene, I don't know what is happening, and I'm trying to find, and there are layers beyond layers. So I just wonder, the outside world, the world that exists beyond the community, our parents, our siblings, our friends, allies, how do they view the world? And one thing I really like about you, and Parmish, I'm making a personal comment here, apart from the beautiful way you dress and you speak and your Queristan book, which I absolutely love, is that you're quite straightforward in the way you say things. And I think that is very important for our community. So I just want to know, what do you think of this new way of being that the community has completely, from iconic people like you who are basically leaving a legacy to creating subdivisions? How do we manage this as a community?
I think every community, every movement. I think a lot of. I think there needs to be serious soul searching, especially amongst uh, people who are either custodians or spokespeople who have um, uh, because I think a lot of the issues that are being raised are very, very valid. The queer community, the queer movement in India has, like queer movements all over the world, have not treated their trans members fairly. Queer movements all over the world have ridden off, the labor of trans people, but when it comes to actually receiving benefits, the people who benefit happen to be cisgendered people and predominantly gay men.
Yeah.
So there are divides, and I mean, just the same way as and there is patriarchy and misogyny are prevalent in Indian society at large. They are very prevalent within the queer movement as well. So I'm so the LBT communities are marginalized more within our movements, and I think it's time that we actually wake up and acknowledge this. So how do you resolve it? I don't know if these things are not resolved, but I think you can mitigate. You can work towards creating a more equitable movement, and I think in that I'm in fact, the second last chapter of Queeristan is about that, where I look at the world all around and actually see these changes coming up. I I think the answer has got to be for a lot of, and I put myself in this, for a lot of us older people, recognizing that our role now is to mentor and to clear the way for the young to occupy that space. I think because the young are creating these wonderful intersectional spaces in which they're addressing some of these. Maybe they're not addressing them perfectly, but they are making incredible attempts. So I think the role here is for a lot of us who might be in our 40s, 50s, and 60s to say, how can we serve more as shepherds and mentors, and use our wisdom and experience to kind of, you know, help people be more productive. So there are, whether it's organizations like Dalit Queer Project, whether it's Queer Muslim Project, whether it's Shinki Homo, whether it's groups like Yaol in Manipur, whether it's activists like Grace Banu, who have been trying so hard to raise um, and to make India's first trans-led agri community thrive. To lesser known, I mean, these are all people we know, right? We know the Jyoti Chands, or we know the Keshav Suris, or we know the Menikas. But people in smaller towns, I mean, I have friends in Jabalpur who are doing incredible work. I have, you know, I've encountered wonderful groups in Kochi, for example. So I think it's really, really time that we showcase that queerness in India is about a range of uh, about it's polyphonic, and we make sure that in that polyphony, multiple voices are heard. And I think that's one way of showing to even ourselves that this is the range of this. This is the texture that we have. And I think that might be a good starting point to then say, uh, if this is how rich a queer movement is, then maybe there should be more trans people speaking for trans rights. There should be, when we think about LGBTQIA representation in places, do we make sure that the I, the B, the
Yes.
T are foregrounded and things like that. So, I mean,
Sure.
that I don't have a solution, but this is like, these are my ramblings. So,
Sure, no, sure, no, sure. Voice. We need more voices, right? And that's what it is. And I think there are more voices coming out thanks to the Section 377. I want to, Parmesh, take you into this
yeah,
journey. Just wait,
yeah,
because coming out. We talk about coming out is not just at home or in your school or education, right? It's also coming out at
yeah,
workplaces.
yeah.
Do you think that India is showing signs of change? The winds of change are here, and I know that there is a very small percentage. But what's your? I mean, I've read the book, and I
Yeah.
know you have a, voice here. So, what?
Yeah.
Just share more about that, please.
Yeah. So do yes, I think that we have made significant steps in the past decade, especially post 2018 with 377 going, because 377 was kind of hanging over corporate India's head in a almost in a I mean, 377 in no way penalized companies or penalized organizations from being inclusive, but its mere presence served as a deterrent to organizations to share their inclusive selves with the world. So I think 377 going away meant that a lot of organizations could actually come out and say we are actually inclusive. So that's been great. I've seen a lot of interest, more from formal organizations, more from larger. But I mean, honestly, it's from big, small, it's from companies across the country, big cities, small cities, etc. And also from facilitating organizations like the CIIs, like the FICCIs, like the All India Management Associations, like the WICCIs, which is the Women in Commerce enterprise, right? So many in engaging in taking their members on a learning journey and about the importance of inclusion and LGBTQ inclusion in particular. So I'm seeing a lot of intent. I'm seeing a lot of positive energy. I'm seeing a lot of infrastructure building. So whether it is the peripheries of the world, which are they're doing the hard work of sourcing trans people, training trans people, placing them in organizations, right? It's like the plumbing building work that a lot of the organizations today are doing on the ground, right? So I'm seeing that infrastructure coming up rapidly. Whether it's consulting companies, whether it's places like Pride Circle, which are building platforms like job fairs, whether it is smaller groups of consultants, like say like what you do, or what Diversity Dialogues does, or what so many other groups do, right? So I'm seeing a lot of this coming up. What I'm not seeing enough of is I'm not seeing it translate into enough of hiring. So I'm seeing a lot of intent, I'm seeing infrastructure building, I'm seeing people talk. And this is in companies in general, but also in my own company where I work. So what so am I happy with the stuff that's been made? Yes. Would I like to see more of it convert into actual hiring? Yes. Um, and both in the private sector as well as in the public sector. Because the truth is, um, all the well-meaning intention and rainbow Instagram filters mean nothing if you cannot change one queer life by giving them the dignity of employment.
So
Because when
true.
you hire a queer person, that person has got a job, that person has got respect, that person goes back and tells their family, look, I am who I am and this organization has hired me. So I'm worth something.
True.
uh, so yeah.
So you do a lot of work in your current role, right, with Godrej Culture Lab. So
Yeah.
does it also go into grassroots level, or is it
No,
very urban?
no. So the Culture Lab has actually been on a sabbatical since last October when COVID hit. So it's not functioning right now. So, but while it ran for 10 years, a lot of the work was on creating a public platform to talk about issues like this as public conversations that were free for the citizens of Mumbai. So we would do film screenings, panel discussions, pop-up art museums, white papers, other kinds of interventions, all to have conversations around contemporary India that we believed were not being had in the mainstream. So we were not doing grassroots activism, but through our platform, we were bringing forth activists of different kinds in conversation with people from other spaces, whether it's from the corporate world, whether from policy, whether from the creative industry. So that was the purpose of the lab. It's just really unfortunate that since last October, we've not. It's gone quiet. But I think a large part of why Godrej has been receptive to ideas about LGBTQ inclusion has also been because through the Culture Lab, we normalized these conversations so much on our campus that when it came to changing policies or when it came to doing some of this work, it seemed very natural because the people at Godrej in HR, etc., were very exposed to these ideas anyway through culture. Which is why when I talk to other companies now, I insist that when they go on this journey, um, they use policies, but they also really use culture.
Fantastic. Parmesh, I won't take too much of your time, but policies versus legislation, right? In like internationally, as you know, in the UK and in New Zealand, you're right. Okay, yeah. In New Zealand, where I worked for many years, in the UK, where I've lived for many years, there are laws which protect the LGBTQIA community, right? It doesn't mean that people don't exist and people don't abuse and do things, but there is a recourse. In India, apart from policies, do you see the legislation changing at some point where you will not be allowed, you'll not be permitted by law to make comments or to abuse a person from the LGBTQIA community?
Well, I would hope so, and I would hope to see it change very, very soon. I think we really need strong anti-discrimination legislation to protect all of us. We need a much, much, much better trans act that can be modified to actually reflect the needs and aspirations of the trans community. The Trans Act in its current format does not. Um, so I think legislation is vital, which is why I think when we are talking about the story of how queerness evolves, in our country, it has to be using these multiple fronts, right? The law exists to protect us, so the law has to change, but the law cannot change in a vacuum. It cannot change in isolation. The law often changes alongside society, which is why the recent Madras High Court judgment by the judge was so incredibly worded. Right? We spoke about how he grew up in this society, which normalized homophobia for him, and how over the course of this he has changed his mind, and he really. So it is very much about saying we need to be. I mean, the law needs to be enlightened as well by learning more about the lived experiences of queer people, which is why I think what you're doing with this show, what other people are doing in various other media formats, whether it's film, whether it's podcasts, whether it's TV, whether it's books, whether it is in doing LGBTQ associations in colleges and schools. We're visibilizing ourselves. We're normalizing ourselves as part of the fabric of this country, so that
Exactly.
when the law changes, it changes with alongside society. But I mean, is it imperative in some cases that the law change fast and first? Hell yeah, because we've been discriminated for far too long. Uh, but it has to be accompanied by all the other things that we are all doing in our multiple spaces, so that the law that changes can actually be lived in practice and we can enjoy its benefits.
I really hope to see the changes happen soon, Parmesh, and at least in my lifetime. I'd
Yeah.
love to see that happen. You've had a very colorful life. I'm just going to say colorful life because I see your life so colorful. Sir Ian McKellen. I mean, you've hung out with him. And for those who don't know the audience, he is the Gandalf in the Lord of the Rings and a very prominent British actor, also a gay rights activist. And of course, many people may have read his books as well. An amazing man. Just tell us
Yeah.
about. I want to know about that. I'm really curious.
So that was fun. He came to India, and we had a wonderful couple of days together actually, because he came to India. He's a global ambassador for queerness, and it's so interesting that a country like the UK, which gave us 377, now has as its ambassador queer icons like Sir Ian McKellen traveling the world, talking about how it's so okay to be LGBTQ that the UK government pays for. So it really goes full circle. So he came to India for many things, but also to inaugurate Kashish that year. And we had the privilege of doing. I mean, there's a video of a conversation that we recorded with the British Council for our culture lab. And what amazed me was, uh, and I really want to be like this as I grow up. I want to be constantly positive. I want to constantly look at the bright side of life. I want to constantly remind myself that even though the moment might be hard, over the course of a lifetime, significant change is possible. I want to remind myself that the purpose of any platform, especially as a queer person, is that when you can use it to amplify other voices. So being with him was truly transformative. He's also an incredible flirt, and if you see our video, you can see how he's flirting with me constantly. Of course, I was flirting back, and at some point, I was like, if this has to go anywhere, darling, you have to come and live in India and do Bollywood films because I'm not coming to London.
Oh, beautiful! I love it. This is what I really love about you. You're just so open and so transparent, and I also love the sensitivity with which you speak. And before we end, I just want to ask you, what would you say to the new generation? Because you have so much to give.
Yeah. So I would say, first, it's a marathon. So recognize that change is long and change is hard. So fortify yourself for the long haul. And there's multiple ways that one can do that, right? One is to recognize that you are part of a larger struggle. So if you're struggling for LGBTQ equality, you're part of a world in which we're struggling for a cleaner planet. We're struggling for just a better world in multiple ways. So our struggle is connected to Black Lives Matter. It is connected to the struggle for against global warming. It is connected to um, to Me Too. It is connected to so many simultaneous global struggles. So recognize that it's long and it's hard, but we are all part of a larger movement towards making the world more equal. That's number one. Number two is at this time, in at least, I mean, nowhere in the world, but especially in India, people from India are listening, don't feel that you are alone. I can't tell you how many people message me on Insta or so many people telling me their stories, and they feel so lonely. And especially at this time, in every city, in every small town in our country, there is a community group. It need not be physical. So reach out and find that community group. Recognize that you have a whole network out there which is here for you. That's number two. And number three is focus on the joy as well. And it's what you started off with. Our stories and our struggles are so much about strife and pain and things that we've overcome, but they're also about beauty and friendships and connections and love that has transcended barriers of every kind possible. So as you're going on this journey, like focus on the fabulosity, on the beauty, on the goodness as well. So that you enjoy this journey, and we actually move into a happy queer India of tomorrow.
Fantastic. What a beautiful positive message. Really, this is exactly how it should be. I mean, we don't need to talk about the pins and needles and the pain and the hurt and dramas also. That happens, and we are here, like Parmesh said, to mentor. Parmesh, any community groups that we can at some point share a link to? Be happy to share it in this.
Yeah, actually, there are so many spaces right now on which are repositories of other. At this point, there are so many queer groups that need COVID relief. So if you go to Pink List India, if you go to if you go to I'm really forgetting it. You know what? I'll send you a message online, and you can maybe put it up after that. Yeah.
Sure, we'll do that. So thank you, Parmesh, for a really, I think, a soulful conversation. And I know it was quite different to talking about your book, which we
Yeah.
will come back. I hope we will come back to this at some point, because this is something, it's a Bible for, I think, all workplaces should have this Bible, because it gives so much of information. But I want to have a proper discussion with you on this on one of my other shows, Parmesh. And your book is available, right? Online as well as at bookstores.
Everywhere. There's also an audible version if anyone wants to listen to 11 hours of me reading it out. I
I,
tried. I tried.
11 million people are going to, at least 11 million people are going to, young men are going to listen to 11
Yeah,
hours of Parmesh Shahani.
but
So,
like I think the Kindle version was free last month for a couple of days. I know like lots of people downloaded it then.
oh,
Uh,
excellent.
but yeah, I hope people use it more than anything else. I hope people use it and actually take the steps, uh, the active steps to hiring more of us. I mean, that's the single reason why I wrote this. So fingers.
Fantastic. And it is one of the best books really on the subject. So please do buy, audience. And thank you. We have a gifting partner, Herbal Therapy, and they're beautiful products. We're going to send you a hamper soon,
Oh my
Parmesh.
God, I
Yes.
love I love herbal therapy. Thank you. Oh
It's
my
a,
God.
it's an indulgence. I think we'd like to indulge you as well. And Nicola, thank you for your support and bringing this together. Nicola is the actual boss. I just ramble. And audience, if you're interested in more information, feedback, thoughts, please write to us at theviewsroom@gmail.com. And thank you for joining us. Remember to follow me at Totally Out Now on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and do subscribe to our YouTube channel for very interesting, very, very interesting, I must say, coming out stories from India. I mean, fabulous people, all iconic, all of them leaving a legacy for us. So do not forget to subscribe. Remember, closets are for clothes and not to hide your truth.
Oh my
Signing
God.
out at Totally Out Now. You're watching Today with Totally Out Now, presented by The Views Room. Thank you very much, Parmesh.
Thank you. Thank you.